From the verdant depths of northeastern China, where Wuchang's rice paddies bow under the weight of golden grains and life pulses to the ancestral rhythm of the land, emerges an account that splits reality like lightning in a clear blue sky. Imagine a universe where the familiar and the inconceivable collide, where the routine of a simple man is shattered by an event so seismic that its shockwaves still reverberate through the corridors of global ufology. This man is Meng Zhaoguo. His name is etched not only in the records of his quiet village, but in the annals of the most disconcerting and detailed third and fourth degree encounters ever documented. Today, we will not just revisit a story of enigmatic lights dancing in the firmament. We invite you on a sensory and psychological expedition. We will delve into the depths of the direct contacts Meng claims to have had, into his disturbing declarations of an intimate union with a non-human intelligence, and into the prophetic echo of his voice, announcing a cosmic cataclysm, days before the most powerful eyes of terrestrial science witnessed it. This is a tapestry woven with threads of awe, fear, skepticism, and a persistent, almost palpable sense of strangeness. What truly happened to Meng Zhaoguo? Was he a pawn in a cosmic game, a visionary touched by beings from beyond, or a man whose extraordinary mind created a parallel reality? Prepare yourselves, for the boundaries of the known are about to be blurred. The extraordinary journey of Meng Zhaoguo unfolds in details never before explored. Wuchang, the agricultural heart of Heilongjiang Province, 1994. Life here is tinged by the color of the black earth, rich and fertile, which ensures the livelihood of its people. It's an existence of hard work, from sunrise to sunset, where daily concerns rarely transcend the next harvest or the rigor of the approaching winter. Meng Zhaoguo, at 26, was a son of this land. His youth had been marked by simplicity and humility. The roof that sheltered him was shared with his wife, young children, and elderly mother. Every day was a battle for subsistence, fought with hands calloused from logging and farming. His studies, abruptly interrupted in the 5th grade, limited his professional horizons but not his character. Those who knew him described him as a hard-working man, of few words, but dense, transparent honesty. His dreams, likely, did not extend much beyond providing for his family. It was May 27th, a day like any other. The afternoon air was warm, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth in the Honk Forest Farm, a rugged workplace of Slovenia nestled on the outskirts of Wuchang, at the foot of Fenan Chan Mountain, Phoenix Mountain, as it was poetically known. Meng and his fellow loggers never imagined that day would mark a rupture in their lives. As the saws roared and sweat poured, something in the sky caught their attention. An intense metallic gleam, moving in an unnatural trajectory. It wasn't a commercial plane nor a bird. It seemed to lose altitude rapidly, disappearing behind the peaks of Phoenix Mountain, followed moments later by a muffled boom that echoed through the valley. The first hypothesis that ran among the men was that of an air disaster, a helicopter perhaps. Concern for possible victims mingled in some with a spark of opportunism. The scrap from an aircraft could yield some much-needed extra money. The group, moved by this mix of apprehension and pragmatism, decided to investigate. They pushed through the dense vegetation, climbing towards the presumed crash site. The expectation was to find twisted wreckage, smoke, perhaps the smell of fuel. But what they found was the disturbing silence of the mountain. No clearing opened by impact, no broken trees, no column of smoke staining the sky. Only the intact landscape and the deepening mystery. The fear of being caught by authorities while scavenging for scrap spoke louder. They turned back, leaving behind only their footprints and an uncomfortable question mark. For the others, the incident might have become just another strange story to tell, but for Meng Zhaoguo, the seed of doubt and curiosity had taken deep root. That metallic gleam, the total absence of traces, it was a puzzle his simple mind couldn't ignore. The following nights were populated by that image. Daily work seemed heavier, the routine more opaque, contrasting with the anomalous glow he had witnessed. 10 long days dragged on, the desire to unravel the mystery perhaps, tempered by the persistent idea of finding something valuable that could alleviate his financial difficulties. became irresistible. On June 6th, he made a decision. He would return to Phoenix Mountain. This time, he wouldn't be alone. His niece, Lerongai, a young woman from the area, would accompany him, perhaps more out of family loyalty than sharing the same obsession. The climb was tense. Meng guided himself by memory, searching for the exact spot where the object had disappeared. After a more thorough search than the first, his eyes found it. There was no mistaking it. The initial shock gave way to a paralyzing awe. It wasn't a helicopter. It wasn't anything he could name. Before them, partially hidden by vegetation, rested an object of colossal proportions and surreal form. The main section, they later compared, resembled a gigantic inverted saucer, from which projected two long, thick tails, giving it a silhouette that, bizarrely, resembled a massive tadpole. The surface was smooth, metallic, and reflected the ambient, light with a diffused sheen, but it had a peculiar hue between yellowish and beige. One of its sections emitted a constant yellowish luminescence, like a vigilant eye. Meng and Rongai, paralyzed, estimated it to be between 10 and 13 feet high at its central part, and its length extended for an unbelievable 490 feet, nearly 150 meters, crushing the vegetation beneath its weight. The air around it seemed to vibrate. The silence of the mountain was then shattered by a sharp, penetrating sound, which seemed to emanate from the bowels of that alien artifact. Almost simultaneously, an invisible wave, a powerful energy discharge, swept through their bodies. The sensation was of thousands of electric needles piercing every inch of skin. Panic took over. The only possible reaction was a desperate flight. They ran without looking back, the shrill sound and the tingling sensation pursuing them. They only stopped many yards below, panting, their hearts beating erratically against their ribs. It was then that Meng noticed a searing pain in his eyes, as if hot sand had been thrown into them. And the horror didn't stop there. The few metal objects they carried, an old hammer, a rusty screwdriver, Meng's cheap wristwatch, began to vibrate and emit small but painful electric shocks upon touch, as if proximity to the object had dangerously energized them. Back in the relative safety of the village, still trembling and with burning eyes, Meng sought out Zongjin, the head of the Loggers' Union. The story he told, detailing the tadpole object and the electric shock, sounded like the delirium of an exhausted man. However, Zongjin was a local leader, accustomed to hearing all sorts of reports from the forest workers. He remembered with a shiver that it wasn't just Meng who had seen something strange days before. Other loggers had commented on the luminous object that had crashed into the mountain. Meng's narrative, though extraordinary and bordering on the unbelievable, now fit into a larger pattern of strangeness. Zongjin's curiosity was piqued. If it was an invention, it was an elaborate and dangerous one. If it were true, the implications were immense. He decided they needed to see for themselves. An expedition was quickly organized. 30 men, a mixture of skeptics, the curious, and some genuinely concerned, showed up. News of the dangerous electric shock had spread, so caution would be the watchword. Thus, on June 9th, the heterogeneous group set off towards Phoenix Mountain with Meng at the front guiding them. The atmosphere was palpably tense. Meng's account of the electric current made them decide to keep what they considered a safe distance, stopping approximately 330 feet, about 100 meters, from the spot Meng, pointing with a trembling finger, indicated was the location of the mysterious object. A pair of binoculars began to pass from hand to hand. Each man adjusted the focus, scrutinizing the mountainside with narrowed eyes. Disappointment was visible on their faces. All they could discern was an area with matted vegetation, some trees that looked broken or scorched, and rocks al-Malihat recent fractures. There was also something that, from a distance, looked like a large piece of yellowish fabric thrown over the bushes. These were signs consistent with the impact of something large and heavy, but nothing resembling Meng's description. Then, it was Meng's turn. He brought the binoculars to his eyes. An expectant silence fell over the group, and what followed defied any rational explanation. Meng's voice came out choked but firm. He saw it. He saw the saucer object with its tadpole tails, exactly as he had described it. But his vision didn't stop there. Next to the immense metallic structure, he claimed to be seeing a humanoid figure, standing, observing them. While his companions exchanged confused and disbelieving glances, as none of this appeared in their lenses, Meng began to describe with increasing urgency the details of the creature. And then he reported that the humanoid raised a small object, no bigger than a matchbox, and from this object a blinding beam of light of an intense bluish white shot directly towards him. In the next instant, Meng began to tremble violently, like a leaf in a storm. A guttural, high-pitched scream escaped his lips, and he collapsed to the ground like a puppet whose strings had been cut. His body was seized by violent spasms, arching and thrashing on the earth. Between moans and screams, one word was repeated, laden with terror: "Light! Light! The light!" The loggers, previously skeptical, were now terrified. They rushed to help him, but Meng's strength in his convulsive state was astounding. They grabbed him, trying to restrain his frantic movements as they carried him, with difficulty, towards a small precarious tool shed nearby. The journey was an ordeal. Meng continued to shake and scream. In a fit of inexplicable rage or panic, even while restrained by several men, he managed to use his legs and feet to strike the low ceiling of the shed, shattering the fragile wooden planks. It took 5 robust men, using all their strength, to finally subdue him and wait for the most violent crisis to pass. News of Meng's collapse and his erratic behavior descended the mountain faster than the men themselves. A doctor from the nearest town was urgently summoned, facing the rugged trail to the isolated shed. Upon arrival, he found Meng prostrate, semi-conscious, and a group of frightened and exhausted loggers. The initial examination revealed a baffling and unprecedented clinical picture for the modest rural doctor. Meng's forehead radiated a feverish heat, dramatically higher than the temperature of the rest of his body, which was surprisingly cold to the touch. A portion of his left eyebrow was visibly burned, the hairs charred. His eyes, which once sparkled with the vivacity of a young man, were now dull, unfocused, as if covered by a veil. His tongue seemed swollen and stiff, hindering any attempt at communication. His eyeballs moved rapidly and erratically under his eyelids, as if chasing invisible images. When the doctor tried to use his stethoscope to listen to Meng's chest, the reaction was immediate and terrifying. Meng began to scream in panic, thrashing, with renewed strength, demonstrating a visceral and sudden aversion to any metal object that approached his body. The phobia was so intense that the mere touch of the cold metal of the stethoscope on his skin triggered convulsions. The instrument had to be placed outside the shed. Continuing the examination as best he could, the doctor noted the strange opacity of Meng's eyes. In an improvised and somewhat crude test, he lit a cigarette and slowly brought the ember close to Meng's eyelashes and cornea. There was not the slightest reaction, no recoil, no blink. It was as if Meng were temporarily blind, or at least insensitive, to pain and reflex. 2 closer friends, still in shock but loyal, supported Meng and took him back to his humble home. They laid him on the sofa in the small living room. His mother and wife, upon seeing his condition, the physical marks, the lost gaze, the unrecognizable behavior, were overcome with despair and incomprehension. The news, of course, did not remain contained within the 4 walls of Meng's house. Like wildfire in dry grass, the story of the expedition, Meng's collapse, and the visions of the humanoid spread like wildfire throughout the Wuchang region. In a few days, Meng's house became a bizarre pilgrimage site. Curious onlookers arrived in droves, some offering help, others just to snoop. Reporters from small local newspapers sniffed a sensational story. And inevitably, the police showed up, more to control the unrest and ensure no laws were being broken than to thoroughly investigate the ufological report itself, as many people began venturing up Phoenix Mountain in search of the fallen object. During a brief and superficial investigation conducted by local authorities, it was discovered that some residents living closer to the loggers' camp had also witnessed the moment the strange object seemed to descend from the sky and crash into the mountain, corroborating the initial report by Meng and the other workers. However, Despite additional searches, the police found absolutely nothing concrete at the site of the alleged landing or crash. No metallic debris, no unknown substances, no physical evidence that could lend irrefutable credibility to those increasingly fantastic reports. In the days following Meng's collapse, while he lay in his house in a semi-comatose state, other loggers and local residents reported a new and terrifying sighting, a bizarre atmospheric phenomenon. They described it as an enormous tornado that seemed to form suddenly, covering almost half of Phoenix Mountain. Its shape was anomalous, different from any tornado they had ever seen or heard of, wider and more protuberant at the bottom, tapering irregularly at the top. And strangest of all, within the swirling funnel of dust and debris, intense red and blue lights flashed intermittently, as if something were signaling or operating inside. As for Meng, after returning home, he spent most of his time in a deep, almost comatose sleep. Some feared he would never fully awaken. During the month that followed the incident, his days and nights were a torment for his family. He would scream in his sleep, thrash about, his body racked by sporadic convulsions. He made strange signs with his hands, as if trying to communicate something urgent or defend himself from an invisible threat. On certain occasions, he would get up and sleepwalk through the dark village streets, his eyes open but vacant, as if immersed in a deep trance. At other times, when he was calmer but still absent, he would take pieces of charcoal or anything that could mark and scribble on old paper, or even on the dirt floor, a series of symbols and letters that no one could recognize. They did not belong to the Chinese language. Some of the strokes vaguely resembled characters from the Latin or even the Greek alphabet, but they were misshapen, mixed, indecipherable. An additional enigma, considering Meng was a practically illiterate man who could barely sign his own name or write simple sentences in his native language. Where did that knowledge, those forms, come from? Meng's state of torpor was occasionally interrupted by brief, fleeting moments of lucidity, a more present gaze, a murmured word that seemed to make sense before he plunged back into the abyss of his condition. Until, finally, something changed. On June 17, 1994, after a period he would later describe, upon regaining his memory, as an agonizing 38-day journey spent in a parallel and incomprehensible reality, Meng seemed to emerge from the depths. He opened his eyes, and this time there was recognition in them. His consciousness, previously fragmented and distant, returned fully. And with it came a story so extraordinary, so detailed, and so disturbing that it would forever redefine his life and the mystery of Phoenix Mountain. With a voice still weak but with surprising clarity, Meng began to recount what had happened to him. He stated that at that fateful moment on June 9th, when the beam of light fired by the humanoid struck him, his consciousness was violently torn from his physical body. He found himself projected outside himself, launched into a kind of alternative dimension. He described it as an ethereal, surreal place where the laws of physics seemed suspended. The environment was charged with an intense, almost palpable energy that he couldn't identify, but that completely enveloped him. Although his body lay inert on Earth, convulsing and later submerged in a coma, his essence, his soul, was awake and active on this other plane. Curiously, he mentioned that at times amidst this dreamlike atmosphere, he would see himself in his own home, observing his family from an impossible angle, like an invisible and powerless spectator. From the first day in this altered state, Meng reported being visited by a humanoid entity of predominantly female appearance. She was an imposing figure, extraordinarily tall, much taller than any human he had ever seen, and of robust build. Her face had features reminiscent of a human woman, but they were more angular, and her eyes were large and penetrating. The most shocking detail, however, was her hands. Each possessed 6 long, agile fingers. Her legs were also disproportionately long and covered in a dense, long fur, which bizarrely and almost comically, if not for the terror of the situation, she wore in elaborate braids. For several days, according to Meng's account, this female creature made advances of an intimate nature towards him. He did not go into graphic detail, but described an overwhelming sensation of fear and revulsion, and an internal struggle to resist those unwanted advances. And this battle fought in his dimension of detached consciousness, manifested in the physical world as the violent convulsions, screams, and abrupt movements that had so frightened and exhausted his companions and family. He felt he was fighting for his integrity, even if he didn't know exactly against what. After days of resistance, exhausted and confused, Meng eventually yielded. Then occurred the physical contact the creature had so sought. He vividly remembered the sensation of floating above his own bed, in the small room of his house while his wife and children slept soundly beside him, oblivious to the drama unfolding just inches away. He was, at the same time, an observer and a participant, aware of his presence in the room and, simultaneously, immersed in that alien and tactile reality. Over a period he perceived as 38 days, these encounters were repeated several times. During one of these contacts, the humanoid allegedly used a small metallic device, which he couldn't describe in detail, to introduce some unknown substance under the skin of his leg. He felt no pain, just a slight prick, followed by the sensation that small warts or nodules were rapidly growing on the spot. At the end of each of these disturbing encounters, the female humanoid would simply turn and pass through the walls of his house, as if solid matter offered no resistance to her, disappearing as mysteriously as she had appeared, leaving Meng in an even greater state of shock and confusion. Then, Meng's narrative took a new turn. On July 17th, he said, 2 other humanoids, these of distinctly male appearance and even taller and more imposing than the female, appeared in his house. They escorted him outside, under the cloak of night. There, to his astonishment, other flying objects of various shapes and sizes, but similar in essence to the tadpole artifact he had seen on Phoenix Mountain, hovered silently over the fields. The male beings used a device that looked like a small metallic communicator, through which they could converse with Meng in his own dialect. The voice emanating from the device was metallic, emotionless but perfectly understandable. They explained to him directly and concisely the reasons for their presence on Earth. They were here, they said, to study the various life forms of the planet, including human beings. They also had an urgent mission to prevent a future and catastrophic collision of a large asteroid with their home planet, an event that could extinguish their civilization. And finally, surprisingly, they stated that one of their purposes was to make peace with the human race, suggesting some kind of past conflict or misunderstanding, the details of which were not provided. Meng was then invited, though he didn't feel he had much choice, to board one of the ships. The journey that followed was swift and disorienting. He remembered very few details of the ship's interior, only pulsating lights and a constant hum. He was taken, according to some sources of his later account, to the being's home planet, a place he, in his simplicity, identified or associated with Jupiter, perhaps due to its grandeur or the colors shown to him. There, or perhaps still, aboard the orbiting ship, he was presented with a large 3-dimensional screen. On it, he witnessed a terrifying and spectacular vision, a fragmented comet, which he would later identify as Shoemaker-Levy 9, on an imminent collision course, with a gigantic gaseous planet, striped with swirling clouds which he again associated with Jupiter. The image of the impact, of the cosmic energy explosion, was etched in his mind. Still on the ship or already at this alien location, one of the beings removed one of the small warts that had appeared on his leg after the substance was applied by the female. The procedure was quick, painless, done with an instrument that emitted a thin beam of light. He tried to inquire about the whereabouts of the female humanoid with whom he had had intimate contact, but his request to see her was flatly denied. He was only told that she was pregnant, and that after a period of 60 years, a measure of time that remained entirely ambiguous without him knowing if they were Earth years or some alien count, the children of this unusual union would be born, and only then would he be allowed to see them and meet them. After this staggering revelation, his memory plunged back into darkness. He only remembers waking up suddenly in his own bed, the morning sun streaming through the window, with a throbbing wound on his leg, at the spot where the wart had been removed. The wound was covered with a strange gelatinous substance, translucent and cold to the touch. In an impulse of revulsion or fear, he tore it off and threw it on the floor, where the substance seemed to liquefy and evaporate rapidly, leaving no trace. Meng Zhaoguo's story, now enriched with details of his intimate encounters, interplanetary travel and the prophecy of hybrid offspring, exploded into public consciousness with the force of a supernova. He found himself at the epicenter of a media and scientific hurricane. His small, humble home was transformed into an unwelcome stage. UFO researchers, both amateur and academic, besieged his door, eager to decipher every syllable of his account. Journalists from all over the country, and soon from abroad, competed for the scoop, many already with the verdict of a hoax stamped on their cynical faces. The curious and skeptical came in hordes, turning his quiet life into an inferno of exposure. China, which until then had a relatively discreet record of widely publicized alien abduction cases, suddenly had in Meng Zhaoguo its most spectacular and controversial example. Investigators from the newly formed China UFO Research Organization, CURO, and other organizations dedicated time and resources to examine the case. Trips were made to Phoenix Mountain, combing every inch of the alleged landing site and Meng's collapse, and to the surprise of some, they found clues that seemed to corroborate parts of the story. Deep burn marks on some trees, which botany and forest fire experts struggled to explain by natural causes. Rock fragments that appeared to have been subjected to intense heat or extraordinary pressure, resulting in unusual fractures. Some researchers hypothesized that such traces would be consistent with the landing or takeoff of an extremely heavy object that had emitted a large amount of energy. Even more intriguing were reports that radiation meters taken to Meng's house allegedly recorded anomalous and significantly elevated readings in specific areas, particularly on the exterior walls of the room where he claimed the alien creatures had passed through. Although specific data from these measurements are difficult to verify today, the claim added another element of mystery. To try to ascertain the veracity of his statements, Meng was subjected to a rigorous polygraph test conducted under the supervision of local police and by experts brought in from Beijing. The atmosphere during the test was tense. Questions about every detail of his experience were asked repeatedly. The result, widely publicized at the time, was that Meng passed the test. His story, at least in the eyes of the lie detector, was consistent and sincere. The interest in the case, already high, reached fever pitch. However, the polygraph, despite its popular impact, was far from conclusive proof for the scientific community or even for the more skeptical ufologists. Strong critics emerged from within China's own UFO research community. One of the most vocal was Zhu Shannon, then Secretary General of the Beijing UFO Research Organization. He publicly stated that Meng Zhaoguo was not a reliable witness, citing information from Wuchang community leaders who considered Meng an eccentric person prone to fantasies even before the alleged events. This characterization undermined Meng's credibility in the eyes of many, but there was an element in Meng's narrative, a specific detail, that stood like a challenging monolith against all attempts at disqualification. The collision of comet Shoemaker-Levy 9 with the planet Jupiter. Meng had described this vision, the fragmented comet, the impact trajectory, the giant planet, based on what he had been shown on the screen aboard the alien spacecraft. His account, including this astronomical detail, had been documented and recorded by investigators before the cosmic event became world news. And indeed, a few days later, between July 16th and 22nd, 1994, the fragments of comet Shoemaker-Levy 9 plunged into Jupiter's atmosphere, producing a series of explosions and dark scars on the face of the gas giant, a celestial spectacle observed. With fascination and amazement by astronomers around the globe, the question was inevitable: how could Meng Zhaoguo, a simple farmer and logger from rural China, with minimal formal education and no access to specialized scientific publications or the nascent internet forums of the time, have predicted or even known the details of such a specific and complex astronomical event days before its official confirmation? For many defenders of his case's veracity, this fulfilled prophecy was the strongest, almost irrefutable evidence that his experience had somehow a connection with an intelligence and knowledge that transcended conventional human capabilities. The impact of this prediction on Meng's credibility was immense, temporarily silencing some of the harshest critics and fueling the fervor of those who believed. Beyond the comet prophecy, there were the physical marks. The scars on Meng's body, particularly on his thigh, where the wart was allegedly removed by the beings, became objects of intense scrutiny. Close friends and family, including his wife, categorically stated that those marks, a linear scar lighter in color than the surrounding skin, and other smaller ones resembling biopsy points, did not exist before the series of events initiated on Phoenix Mountain. They were for them physical proof of alien intervention. Skeptics, on the other hand, quickly counter-argued. Meng was a logger, a manual laborer. His profession exposed him daily to risks of cuts, scratches, and injuries. The scars could easily be explained as the result of past work accidents, perhaps forgotten or not properly recorded. However, the conviction of those who knew Meng intimately was hard to shake. They insisted those marks were new, different, and Meng was not completely isolated in his initial observations, a crucial factor in sustaining his case. His co-workers, who witnessed the fall of the luminous object on Phoenix Mountain, and the other local residents who also reported seeing the same unusual aerial phenomenon around the same time, provided a chorus of testimonies that could not be easily dismissed. And there was also the report of the strange tornado with internal lights, observed by multiple people days after Meng's collapse. Would it be plausible for such a large and diverse group of individuals, many of whom didn't even know each other well, to have conspired to invent and sustain such an elaborate and complex lie? A hoax that, moreover, managed, at least in part, to withstand the scrutiny of the police and experts who investigated the case. And of course, there was the testimony of his niece, Larongai, who was with him during the second encounter with the object on the mountain and who confirmed the details of the electric shock and the artifact's appearance. The multiplicity of witnesses, even for peripheral events, lent an additional layer of complexity and potential credibility to the core of Meng's story. While the debate over the case's veracity raged, the Honk Forest Farm and Phoenix Mountain, once remote places of work and wild nature, began to attract a different kind of visitor. After the initial whirlwind of curious onlookers and investigators, local authorities and farm administrators realized the unexpected potential of the situation. A fence and a gate were erected at the entrance of the trail leading to the incident site, initially to control access and ensure safety, but soon the idea of capitalizing on the case's notoriety began to take shape. There were discussions about charging visitation fees, creating a small museum, and officially renaming the mountain to something like E.T. Mountain. Although many of these more ambitious plans did not materialize at the time, the seed of UFO tourism had been planted. In 2001, the area around Phoenix Mountain was officially designated as a national forest park, a decision that, while aimed at environmental preservation, also facilitated visitor access. The definitive consecration of the site as a point of interest for UFO enthusiasts and tourists seeking the bizarre came in 2010, when a hotel and restaurant were built near the exact spot where Meng Zhaoguo claimed to have had his first close encounter with the alien object. The region, previously known only for its rice production, now boasted a new and unusual identity, a testament to the lasting impact of a simple peasant story. For Meng Zhaoguo, life after 1994 was irrevocably transformed. From an anonymous rural worker, he was catapulted to the status of a national celebrity, albeit a deeply reluctant and haunted one. He became the protagonist of one of China's, and perhaps the world's most well-known and debated alien abduction cases. His face graced magazine covers, his story dissected on television programs, and in countless newspaper articles and ufological publications. However, this avalanche of attention was a heavy burden for Meng. He seemed genuinely averse to fame and public scrutiny. On several occasions, he tried to dodge reporters, refused invitations to high-profile shows, and, more significantly, rejected considerable financial offers for the exclusivity of his story, or for the production of films and documentaries. There seemed to be an aversion in him to profiting from what he considered a sacred, or at least deeply personal and traumatic experience. There are reports that he even instructed his children to lie about their identity, if recognized in public, asking them to say they were from another family, that they were being mistaken. Meng himself, in casual encounters where he was identified, sometimes denied who he was, seeking only anonymity and peace. Each interview request was evaluated with extreme care, and the vast majority were rejected. He developed a sixth sense for identifying those who sought only cheap sensationalism, to the detriment of his story's integrity. Years later, seeking refuge from this unwanted notoriety and a better life for his family, Meng accepted a job as a janitor and later as a minor instructor at a university in the city of Harbin, a large urban center far from Wuchang. The position, modest in itself, offered significant benefits he would never have achieved as a logger. A functional apartment with central heating, a luxury in those latitudes, a job for his wife and daughter on campus, and, crucially, access to a good school for his son, who showed aptitude for studies and was learning English. It was an opportunity for a fresh start, to offer his loved ones a future with more prospects, far from the shadows of the forest and the stigma of crazy or liar that some still cast upon him. Despite the decades that passed and the persistent skepticism of many, Meng Zhaoguo never wavered in his version of events. He continued to affirm with the same serene conviction that his experiences were real. More than that, he began to emphasize that the creatures with whom he interacted had conveyed important messages to him, warnings about the urgent need for environmental conservation, respect for nature, and a change of course for Earth's future. This aspect of his narrative, that of the contactee with a message for humanity, became increasingly prominent in his rare later public appearances, reinforcing his personal commitment to ecological causes. In 2003, Meng agreed to undergo a new and even more rigorous polygraph test, this time organized by a television crew producing a documentary about his case. Again, the results were surprising. The polygraph indicated he was being truthful when recounting his experiences. This second positive result rekindled interest in his story among enthusiasts and researchers, and the Meng Zhaoguo enigma gained a new and intriguing chapter in 2016. He came forward to report an alleged second significant encounter with the same creatures, or at least with representatives of the same species. During this new contact, he claimed to have received a small object, a fragment of comet Shoemaker-Levy 9, the very same one he had seen colliding with Jupiter in his 1994 vision. This fragment, according to Meng, was later analyzed by scientists, although the details of this analysis and the identity of the scientists remain nebulous and controversial. The claim was that the fragment contained an anomalous concentration of terbium, Tb, an extremely rare lanthanide metal on Earth. The presence of this element, if confirmed, would add another layer of extraordinary strangeness to his already unbelievable narrative, raising questions about the material's origin and the technology involved. The saga of Meng Zhaoguo, a peasant turned cosmic messenger, remains one of the most complex and polarizing in modern ufology. It is a labyrinth of extraordinary claims, circumstantial evidence, corroborating testimonies, and persistent skepticism. Was he truly a chosen one? An abductee who returned with a glimpse of the vast and unknown universe that surrounds us? Are his scars stigmata of an alien encounter? Is his fulfilled prophecy about the comet the seal of authenticity on a story that might otherwise be easily dismissed as fantasy? Or are we facing a complex case of psychological projection, a modern folklore born from the fertile mind of a simple man confronted with the inexplicable? Definitive answers seem as elusive as the very ships he described. Meng Zhaoguo's case forces us to confront the limits of our perception, the tenuous boundary between the real and the imagined, and the eternal human search for meaning in the face of mystery. It invites us to question not only the possibility of extraterrestrial life, but the nature of consciousness and reality itself. And now we turn the floor over to you, explorer of the unknown who accompanies us here at Alien Cases. What is your reading of this intricate tapestry of events? Do you believe Meng Zhaoguo's experience as he related it, Or do you see alternative explanations for the phenomena that surrounded him? What weight do you give to the comet prediction or the scars on his body? Is there any aspect of this story that resonates more deeply with you, or any detail you consider crucial to deciphering this enigma? We would love to read your theories, your doubts and your reflections in the comments below. This is a space for us to discuss with respect and curiosity. If this deep dive into mysteries that challenge our understanding is the kind of content that feeds your mind and expands your horizons, we ask you to leave your like. This simple gesture is like a beacon for YouTube, indicating that investigations like this, which dare to delve into the inexplicable, have value and deserve to be shared with an even larger audience of cosmic explorers. Your support is the energy that propels our Alien Cases ship to continue sailing the seas of the unknown, in search of more stories that make us look at the sky with a new perspective.